Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Swisspreneur. Today I'm in Zurich at the offices of Ava, and I'm meeting Lea von Bidder. I will talk to her about being a female founder, and I also want to get some advice how it is to start a company in the US. Let's go and pick her up. Hi Lea.
Hello, hi.
Great to be here. I was so looking forward to that interview because I read on LinkedIn your post. You posted about that my girls won't be entrepreneurs in Switzerland, so I really would like to focus on that. But
prove me wrong.
I try. But maybe to start out, like where we are here, could you tell us a little bit about this place and about your office in Zurich?
Sure, absolutely. So we are in the building where our office is, and this is kind of the restaurant that is downstairs, Daisy's. And yeah, we have our office here. The headquarters of Ava is here in Zurich, where we have now around 25 people.
Where else are you in the world?
We have two more offices. We have one office in San Francisco, where we have around 5 people now. And then we have an office in Serbia, where we do all the software development.
And in San Francisco, you're mainly in San Francisco, right?
I am mainly in San Francisco, yeah. I moved to San Francisco around 2 years ago to build up the office there.
Okay, so I think that would be also a great topic. We should try to talk about it, like why San Francisco and why not Switzerland or why both. So I think that's something which is super interesting for startup founders.
Absolutely.
But maybe to start out, like you posted that it is not just that the girls, so you, on one hand, you looked at all the data, you said a little bit the data is incomplete, or you collected more data about it, how many girls or how many women are actually starting companies. But on the other hand, you also told the reader what's going to happen with that if it's that way, and what the impact will be. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, and why do you think it's so important to have women in these positions and starting companies?
Sure. So I think the whole topic is very close to my heart and has always been. And I think what I saw in the startup ecosystem is the startup ecosystem in Switzerland is still really young. And so there's still potential to kind of influence it and give it some direction. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen in the last couple of years where the startup ecosystem grew is that we just have a huge gender gap in the Swiss startup ecosystem. And that's not, in any way extraordinary, because we have that in San Francisco as well. It's everywhere, but in Switzerland it's very particular, plus also I'm from Switzerland, so I really care about what's going on here. And the gender gap is, what you said, on the one hand, it's much bigger than I think people believed, because the statistics I got all the time was, 50% of companies are nowadays founded by women, right? Mm-hmm. That's the statistic everyone throws around. Yeah. And that is wonderful. But the thing is just, if you then look at particularly startups, defined as probably high growth companies, potentially with venture capital or third-party financing, if you look at just that little subsegment of companies, there the gender gap is much, much bigger than people think.
It's 1 out of 10, right?
Yeah, and so it was important for me to specify that a little bit, because I think that the problem was a little bit underestimated, even though everyone, you must know, I know, everyone that is in a startup ecosystem knows there was just really no data about it. So that's why it was important to me to kind of just float up the data a little bit. And then on the other hand, your other question, what the issue with that is I sincerely believe that we are now moving into a digital age where startups are going to become much bigger, and they're going to be the main employers of a lot of people in the future here in Switzerland. And so it's really a vicious circle, because if you have a lot of men starting those companies, they're potentially going to hire more men to run those companies. Those men are going to run off and start their own companies, or if they're successful, they are going to be the future investors. So the startup ecosystem reinforces itself. Mm-hmm. And once you start having a gender gap at one point, be it founders, then that's just going to trickle down the entire ecosystem. And I think it's really important for us that we are really aware of this right now and already try to give it some direction and try to, improve the situation while we still can.
Is that something you realized also when your colleagues, like your co-founders who are male, are hiring, that they are more likely to hire guys and you're more likely to hire girls? So where does that come from? Or is there a study or something underneath that it's just, that we just feel more comfortable, that I'm feeling more comfortable to hire a guy and you feel more comfortable to hire a woman?
I think it's less about being comfortable. I think you would be as comfortable hiring a woman as I am comfortable hiring a man or a woman, but it's it's more about when you're in a startup, you're constantly under pressure to hire. You never have time to hire someone, right? If you take the decision to hire someone, it's long overdue every single time, right? So you're standing there and you say, okay, we finally have this budget or whatever, we need to hire that person tomorrow.
Who knows someone in
exactly,
the office?
Who knows someone? It's the first reaction. It's like, everyone, we need someone right now, or actually yesterday. And that's more it, right? It's more that because you're hiring so many people in your network, it's just easier to hire your friends' friends, and I would assume that men still have a much more male network and women just have a more female network. And that's kind of what's happening, right? And I think in startups, that's just what it is, and you can't blame anyone for doing that because you're in a hurry, your company is, still really fragile. But that's kind of where that comes from.
So in your article, I saw that there are certain groups you're giving advice to. Could you tell us a little bit what the advice is you're giving in your article?
Sure. So I think on the one hand, it's important that founders are aware. I think that's really all it takes, I think, awareness. Because a lot of founders think, well, I don't have the time to deal with this right now. This is not the highest priority. And then they kind of think, well, this whole diversity thing, I'll get to that when I have 100 people, 200 people, whatever. But what they forget then is that it really reinforces itself throughout the entire organization. So you have to, as a founder, I think very early on, you already have to be very aware of the culture that you're building, and that should just be a part of the culture. So I would really urge founders to be really aware that if they hire in their network, that's kind of what's going to happen to their organization. And then I also think investors should be really careful around that. Investors should be looking at their numbers and look at how many companies they're funding that have female founders, one or many. And the reason for that is because investors want to invest in companies that they somehow recognize that are going to be successful. So a lot of investors have this bias of, they know Mark Zuckerberg is really successful, so they're going to try to fund companies that look like Mark Zuckerberg's company. Right. And because we don't have really a lot of female founders that have been really successful and can serve as role models, I think investors should be aware of this bias that they have when it comes to funding companies.
Got it. Seems all very logical, but actually it's just mainly being aware of it and just think it through and realize what's actually happening when I take certain decisions. Exactly. Maybe to learn a little bit more about your situation and how you became an entrepreneur. Like I'm like really grateful that we have you. You said we don't have these role models, and as you know and I know and probably we can share, I had to convince you a little bit to actually step up and do this interview. Yes. But I think it's so valuable that female entrepreneurs do that, as you already mentioned, and so I'm very grateful for that. And so I think it's really for young female wannabe entrepreneurs who are thinking about starting the company, I think it would be very, very interesting to learn how you became an entrepreneur. Did you grow up already in an entrepreneurial environment, in an entrepreneurial family, or how did you grow up?
It's a good question. I actually did. So my mother has her own consulting company, and my father used to work in pharmaceuticals but started his own company when I was around 14 years old. As a side project, he has many side projects. So it was very interesting for me to see, and I think that was definitely inspiring. But still, I went to the University of St. Gallen when I was 18, and I very clearly thought that I'm gonna become a strategy consultant like everyone else. So that was really the path that I took initially, and that was really what I wanted to do. And then I think I was just, somehow I got more and more interested in entrepreneurship. So I know a lot of founders that I know in San Francisco, they kind of started their first company when they were 10 years old or 11, and then they opened, a lemonade stand and whatever else. And I really didn't have that. I think it started for me much later when I was at university.
Did something special happen? Like, were there any people or any classes or something, like really, could you take us really at that place where it changed? Like, can you remember when you thought, oh, maybe being an entrepreneur would be cooler than a consultant at a consulting firm? Yeah,
so I think it was like a series of really small steps that led to it. So I started taking a few classes in St. Gallen just because I was interested. And then I did my exchange semester in Montreal, and so in Montreal, Canada. And then what happened there is in Montreal, there's this chocolate chain, like it's chocolate shop, cafe chain called Juliet Chocolat. And we spent so much time there. And I always thought it was fascinating, given that I'm Swiss, and they have this really successful chocolate concept, and I've never seen anything like that in Switzerland. And I just really liked it, and I thought it was a great idea. And so I came back to Switzerland, and I convinced the professor at the University of St. Gallen that I could write a business plan as a bachelor thesis, which I think everyone around me was jealous of, because if you have to write a theoretical 40-page thesis, and I'm next to you, and I'm like, I'm writing a business plan. Cool. So that was great. So that was my first business plan, and I'm really glad they let me do it, because it's really not the standard practice of what the university did at that time. So I did that, and I never really thought that I'm actually going to start it. It was more like a fun project. So at that time, I still didn't really think that I'm going to do that. But then I had to choose my master degree, and I basically had two choices. So I started looking around, and I knew that I wanted maybe to do something in entrepreneurship, but I also knew that I could do the strategy master at the University of St. Gallen, which would prepare me perfectly for this consulting career.
Right.
So I applied to different things, and basically in the end it really came down to the strategy master at the University of St. Gallen, or this crazy entrepreneurship program that would be in France, China, and the US, and only a year, and it seemed very different. And I think the lucky thing there was that I was backpacking in South America at the time when I had to take that decision. Yeah. So I think I was somewhere on the beach in Chile, and I had to decide whether to go back to the University of St. Gallen or go to do this crazy program that would bring me to all places in the world and teach me about entrepreneurship. And I mean, at that point, I definitely decided for the entrepreneurship program.
Cool.
And so that's how the whole thing started. And then once I ended up there, it became more and more solidified. And I also started my first company then during that program.
And what kind of program is it? Was it offered by the University of St. Gallen, or was it something else?
It had nothing to do anymore with the University of St. Gallen. So I went away from that, from St. Gallen, and it's a master in international entrepreneurship. And it's really led by Lyon in France, Zhejiang University in China, and Purdue University in the US. And you basically do a semester at each place together with a group of people. And we were around 35 people. We did the whole track together. And I think now more than half have their own companies. So it was really, really important. And I think it impacted all of us really, really strongly. So almost everyone went the entrepreneurship track or now works in a startup.
Wow, cool. So you would say actually it was on one hand that you were open to the world at that moment, traveling. So you would recommend to travel, like to see the world, to expose yourself to other cultures. And on the other hand, it was really this step you made into that program, and then being with like-minded people who have the same, like I think it's like boarding a train a little bit. Like if you board the train, you're realizing, hey, we are going somewhere, and you don't want to step out, or there has to be a major issue. And so you never thought again about becoming a business consultant like that. Was at that point that was gone, or is it still something you think sometimes about it? And how do you feel? Like, what would be the Lea now as a business consultant? Is that an image you can?
I mean, I think I would have been perfectly happy as a consultant. I think, I think what's kind of the red line through all the things that I've done is I always wanted to do really, really challenging things, and I always wanted to challenge myself a lot. And I think that's probably how business consulting came up, because it just seemed like the hardest track you could possibly do. And then I found another track that was also really hard. So I think I would be perfectly happy also in consulting. It would have just been a very different path, and I'm happy I didn't take it. And now I would never go back to it anymore. No, but I understand that I was fascinated by it a couple of years back.
Maybe to go a little bit back, we a little bit skipped it. You said you told me about the business plan of the chocolate company, but actually a very similar concept came to life, like as your first startup. Could you tell us a little bit about that, and maybe also like why you did it and why you did it in Bangalore and not in Switzerland, because Switzerland is the chocolate country.
It is. So I came back. So I wrote this business plan, right? Really, it was this thesis business plan, and I just wanted to have a good grade in my thesis. But the good thing there was that I basically cold called people in the chocolate industry in Switzerland, and they were all really nice, and they all were willing to meet me for interviews or conversations, and those were connections that I later used a lot when I actually started my company. But at that time they met me because they didn't really take it really serious, and they were just really nice to help out the student. But that's how I got into this whole chocolate industry a little bit. So I understood chocolate to a certain degree when I started my master's. And I mean, I love chocolate. Chocolate is one of my biggest passions in life. And then, so I started my master's degree, and there was after. So we first went to France, and my business partner, my later business partner Anusha, she saw France, she went to Brussels, she went to Belgium, and she saw all those chocolate stores, and she kind of fixated on the idea that bringing premium chocolate to India would be an interesting idea. And then we met in China. When we were in China, we basically had the first meeting, and she said, look, I really want to start this. You're Swiss, you obviously understand chocolate, you know. The typical how naive you are when you start a company. You're like, oh yeah, you know. So why don't we look at that together? And I was like, okay, that sounds like a great project to have. And then we took it quite seriously, you know. I mean, you have before I had a lot of business plans. I have my typical Word or Excel sheet that I think a lot of us probably have, where we just write down random ideas, and I just thought, okay, that's just another one we could potentially do. But I always thought I would want to go back to chocolate, and then the fact that it was in India made a lot of sense to me. So we started working on it, and then one thing leads to another. You have an email address, and then you take yourself really serious, and then you think you kind of have to follow through with the whole entire idea afterwards. And I mean, for me, it was interesting because after my matura, when I was 18 years old, I went to travel in India for 2 months. I backpacked in India, so I knew India from before. Yeah. So it made sense to me to do something like that there. Yeah. So anyways, in China, we kind of built the whole thing up. When we were in the US, we really wrote the business plan. We started getting the investment from her family company. And then 2 weeks after the US, we moved to India, or I moved to India and started the company.
Did she come along, or how did you do it, like, together? Was she in the same program? She was in the same program?
She was in the same program as I was. She was my colleague in the program, and she lived in Bangalore. So she's Indian.
She is Indian. She already knew, like, how it's going to be. So that helped a lot, too.
Absolutely.
Like, probably without her, would you have gone to India, or?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No.
So it's very different, right? I've never traveled to India, so I think.
I really like my time there. I was in India before, but I mean, the fact that she brought it up was really important. I mean, she said, well, because I told her I want to do something with chocolate again, and I knew Switzerland is going to be almost impossible to do. And then she said, why don't we do it in India? And then it all got together, and it started to make sense.
And how come did you end that time? It was just 2 years, right? Like, your time in India?
It was 2 years in the end.
And how did it, like, end for you, or why did you say, I'm coming back, and what were the main reasons to stop?
I think it had a lot of different reasons. I think we had, after 2 years, it was, for me, it started to be, I sort of wanted to go back to Switzerland after a while. I was there for 2 years, it was wonderful, but I kind of felt that I have to move on to the next thing. That was definitely on the one side. And then on the other side, it was also, between us, it wasn't always easy. We had a lot of cultural things that worked differently. She had a different vision for the company at that time. And that's why, in the end, it made sense for me to go back. And I started to have different ideas. I had a new business idea, so I wanted to go back to Switzerland and get started with something else.
And how did you resolve it? Like, could you tell us, like, maybe, I think there are a lot of founders out there who maybe realize that they don't have that good fit, and I think that's something that can happen, actually, and I think we should be very candid about it, that it's happening. And how did you resolve it? Like, what did you do, like, together as a team when you realized, okay, the fit is not that great? How did you actually split up?
Yeah, split ups are hard, and I think it wasn't, I mean, we're no role models at all in this, because I think our split up wasn't great. I mean, basically, at some point, we just said this doesn't make sense anymore, and I left. But I mean, it was a hard process, because it's hard, especially if it's your first company. You're really close to that company, so leaving it was rather difficult.
Yeah. And is there anything you do different, like the next time, like you started anew? We will soon talk about Ava. Did you do something different now, like now choosing a co-founder, now being in a team? Is there any recommendation you can give someone looking for a co-founder than actually being successful with a co-founder?
Yeah, so I mean, when I joined Ava, there were already just 3 of them there, and they were basically looking for one additional person, and that was me. So I didn't choose just one co-founder. I kind of decided whether I want to join that team or not. And I think probably 3 things that were very different. First of all, the team was built probably especially by Pascal, who was the first one to really start building that team in a very strategic way. So it was not just, oh, we're all friends, let's just do a company together. It was very strategically, we need one person for this, one person for that, and one person for that. And that was definitely the right choice. And we didn't know each other before, so we met through business, and then we started working together. So it was a much more strategic way of doing this. I think the second thing is we started working together initially without me being a co-founder. That really helped. So we had like almost a probation period for both of us, I would say, where they could see whether I would fit in and I could see whether I would want to join the company. And that really helped. And I think the third thing is also to be very open about what you want. I think a lot of founders really struggle with those conversations about shares, about money. How do you do that? And it's a very uncomfortable situation. That's at least what I had in my first company. It's very uncomfortable to talk to your co-founder about shares, especially if you think especially if there's an imbalance, if it's not just straight out 50-50, but for some reason there's going to be an imbalance. And I think at Ava, we managed from the beginning on to have very open conversations about that and about what everyone expects, and we still have those. And I think that really helps, because in the end, with those people, you're going to work with those people for years. So if you're not happy about certain things from day one on, that's really difficult. And I think that's something you need to just have a very transparent conversation about.
So if you would have to choose between a friend or a business partner, you would rather go for a professional relation, like if you can really, so you ended up to have more successful teams, or you believe that there are more successful teams if they are more picked strategic? Because probably like young entrepreneurs, they just tend to say, hey, let's just do it, let's just...
And I think, there's great examples of people where that absolutely worked out, right? I think there's no right way, but in the end, I think what's really important is that person might be your friend, but you really need to be clear of what will he or she bring to the company and what will you bring to the company. And if that's for both of you the same thing, and that's one of the potential issues we had in India, that we both thought finance should be in our area, and so if you need to be super clear from the beginning who brings what to the table. And that doesn't mean that your friend has to be the absolute genius in that and you should only pick him or her strategically for that, but you need to have some understanding of this role distribution and whether that's going to work out or not. And I personally would value the skill set and the role. I would value that higher than the friendship itself. So I'd rather would want to work with someone that really fills that role than a friend who has kind of an overlapping idea of what they would be doing.
Okay, yeah. I think that's what I realize often, that there are like three guys or girls founding together a company, and then like after a couple of months already one left. And I think that's a very, very frustrating process for the one who has to leave or wants to leave, but also for the ones who stay on. And especially at the time where you could use your energy in a much better way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's absolutely something to avoid, but it's also
happens.
Really hard to avoid, especially with your first company, I think, where you're just excited and
probably something I also feel like what you're saying is, rather, if you realize it doesn't work, rather put an end to it and say, hey, move on, there are other ideas, there are other co-founders, then stick too long with it if you're just don't get anything achieved together.
I think it's all about valuing your time, because you always have opportunity costs. You could always be doing something else. Right. And I think everyone should be really aware that I also think that this time, maybe that's more a women-focused thing, but it shouldn't be. It should really be for both genders. But your time where you have all this energy and you have no responsibility, and you could also work for free for a couple of months and it will be fine. That time isn't so long, right? Because at some point you might have a family, and then the whole thing gets much more complicated, or you buy a house or a dog or whatever else you do, right? So this time where you have pretty much zero responsibilities isn't that long. So if something doesn't work out, and that was the case what I had in India, it totally makes sense to just shift to something else at that point.
Maybe more bringing it to Ava now. You're not wearing your bracelet right now. You have it here. You brought it along, but maybe there is a reason you are not wearing it during the day, right?
Yes. Ava's only worn during the night, which really helps so that you don't have to show all of your friends and family that you're trying to get pregnant right now. But yeah, so Ava's worn during the night only.
And could you maybe explain us a little bit how it works? Like there are so many sensors, like people ask me, is it invasive or not? It's not, just to be clear on that. But could you like tell us a little bit how you brought that together and how the idea came to this product now?
Sure, absolutely. So maybe quickly what we are doing. So Ava is really a women's health company, and our product, or the first product we have, is this wearable that you wear during the night. What it does is it tracks 9 different physiological parameters. You see a little bit the sensors here on the downside. It's from temperature to breathing rate to pulse rate variability, and others that it measures continuously during the night. And we are measuring those parameters to understand the hormonal changes of a woman during her menstrual cycle, which allows us to pinpoint very accurately the very beginning of a woman's fertile window, which is especially interesting for women who are trying to get pregnant. And that's basically what Ava does right now. It helps women to understand where they are in the cycle, when they can potentially get pregnant, and helps them get pregnant faster. And it's really a device that basically the alternatives to Ava at this point are, you know, still from urine sticks to basal body temperature, where you take your temperature every morning and you put it into this big chart. So our whole aim here was really to come up with something that was much more modern, 21st century, and it could really support women, where we use technology for everything we do, but somehow in fertility tracking and cycle tracking, it has just been long overdue. And the methods we've had were really 50 years old, if not older. So that's kind of how the whole thing came up. And I think all of us founders have a different entry point to why this was important to us. I mean, I have co-founders who were trying to get pregnant, co-founders who used this for, or had cycle tracking for other reasons. And I think we all had a really kind of personal story around why we wanted this to happen. I mean, for me personally, the big vision here is to bring this into the contraceptive area in the future. That is more on top of my mind at this point, because I'm not starting a family yet. But I mean, it's just such an important part of your life that every one of us was kind of intrigued to do this.
Yeah. And the pill is actually not the best option, right? We agree on that. Probably it's just too many hormones, and if you can do that without all these hormones, it would be like a super great healthy device. Where
I think it's a very personal decision, and it really depends where you are in your life, if the pill is the best thing for you or not. I mean, my personal experience, I had a lot of trouble with birth control, and I know that a lot of my friends had. And I think right now the gap between hormonal birth control and non-hormonal birth control is too big. Hormonal birth control is viewed as very safe and the standard that you should have, and non-hormonal birth control is still very inaccurate. It's really difficult for women to use. So I understand that women are not switching to that, even though they would like to get off the hormones. Switching to non-hormonal just seems too risky and too difficult. And I really hope, or my vision for Ava is that we would step into that gap and be actually an alternative for women to use a contraception that is non-hormonal, but is still accurate and is really easy to use. And that's what we're trying to do, but it's still going to take a while till we're there.
When you say a while, like, what do you think? Like, what would be your wish? Do we talk for months or years or centuries? Like, how far are we away for someone who is not understanding the full technology? And
I think we are less than 5 years away, but it's going to be years. So.
And what changes do you have to make to the product, or what do you have to improve that you actually can predict the opposite?
Yeah. So it's really an algorithm question. So if right now the whole product and the whole algorithm is focused on detecting your very most fertile days. If we wanted to do contraception, we would have to turn that around, and it would have to not only recognize the most fertile days, but all days that could be potentially fertile. So it's really a change in the algorithm. But a change in the algorithm doesn't sound like such a big deal to do. But if we want to do contraception, we need to do all the medical and clinical studies before we can write this algorithm even, and then especially before we deploy it. So there's a lot of clinical research that we still have to do. We have to do a larger clinical study. And then obviously it's the whole regulation path that is just taking time. Contraception is a highly regulated area, more highly regulated than where we are in right now. And that would definitely take time.
That's in the US, it's an FDA approval, or?
We are FDA registered at this point as a MedTech Class 1 device. We are also registered in Europe and CE marked, but contraception will get us into a higher class. and that is what will take some time.
Okay, got it. Maybe you could tell us also a little bit how you built the company, so how you went from, and I said you raised a lot of money, raising money in Switzerland, a lot of people say, okay, it's easy to get some business angel monies, but after $1 million, most companies will not find money. What's your take on that, or how were you able to be so successful and so determined on your way to growing a company?
Yes, I think one thing initially that I still very much admire about my co-founders that we had even before financing is what they did. And I think it's important to note here that my co-founders had companies before, successful companies that we still hear and are still around, and I think that taught them that. But what we did really from day one on is we were a company. I think a lot of people start a company and then they don't really dare to tell other people, and at a social event they would say, oh, I'm working on this project. But Ava was really from the beginning on a company, from day one, and we said this is our job and this is what we're doing. We never really questioned the whole thing. It was never, oh, I'm working on this, but I'll see if it works out. It was really just, we're going to make this work somehow, and this is now a company. We took it very serious from day one, and also we started paying ourselves salaries out of the own money that we invested, but still, which is for tax reasons a horrible idea, but for how you think about your job, we really saw this as a paying job from day one because we basically paid ourselves. And I still really admire that because I wouldn't have done that, and I think that was a really interesting approach because it didn't allow us to go back anymore. We told everyone we're doing this. There was the whole structure in place. Anyway, so we did that, and I think that was really important. And then we came up with a prototype for Ava, which was a big black box you could put on your arm, but it helped. And I think one thing we're doing medical technology, and that just takes time. And the thing we did initially is we went out and we basically won almost every significant Swiss startup prize. Wow. And that really helped because that got us the initial financing, so we would already have data when we had to raise our seed round. Because otherwise, especially as a medical company, it's very hard to get to that point. But we won money initially, and that just really helped us.
The seed funding actually came through.
Seed funding was competitions. It was competitions, and then on the other hand, we also worked with CTI. For our clinical study.
Or a CTI project.
Exactly. So we had those kind of sources, and that led us to when we raised our seed round, we already had a prototype, we had some data, and we had some idea of where this might be going. So that really helped. So when we raised our seed round, we already had, that was in November 15. So we were already on this for a whole year at that point before we raised seed money.
So you didn't raise very early. So you stayed the dependency on investors came into place at a not later stage, but you had a long period where you were able to prepare, where you were finding out what you actually do.
I think so. Looking back at that point, it still felt really early when we had to raise, right? Because we still didn't have a lot of things in place. But now looking back, we had certain things in place, and we had to have those in place because we had to have some kind of prototype and some idea of what we're going to be doing. So that was good. That really helped us for our seed round. And also, again, seed round, one of our seed round investors is Swisscom, which also came through for a startup competition. So we really took
all the
advantage.
Help you can get.
Yes, we really did. We really took advantage of those prices. They were really important to us in the end, which is interesting because now looking back, the amount isn't huge, but when you're right at the beginning, the amount is really, really significant for you.
On the other hand, probably there were other companies competing against you during that time and they didn't win. What's your take on competitions like that? Because in the end, there are so many people out there who are then the losers. In your case, you were the winner, but for the others?
Look, I think those startup competitions are, it's impossible for those companies to really judge who they are gonna get to win, but also then for investors at a later stage, it's also it's not going to be fair, and it's not going to be fair for. That's the whole thing about investing, right? Even seed rounds, there's losers and there's winners because people do a certain amount of rounds. So I think the selection process there is hard, and it's not necessarily fair on an objective level. So I would never, just because you lose in a competition, that doesn't mean your idea doesn't work at all. I mean, I would take that feedback, and I mean, even if we won some of them, we also got really critical feedback and we took it really serious. And I think that helps. But in the end, that's one way to finance yourself through to a seed round. But you can also finance yourself without winning all those competitions. I think it was just for us, it was really, really helpful.
Yeah. Maybe that's something you're bringing up, the feedback, because there are prizes you can win where you get feedback, even if you lose. And there are prizes, they just don't give you feedback. They just say you didn't qualify. So maybe that's something a startup entrepreneur could think about if they put a lot of hours into preparing for something like that, that they at least get a feedback. And maybe what I think is that your startup was a little bit designed to win these prizes. Like it's a nice idea, it works very well, like it feels so obvious that someone should do that, and then with a young woman at the top of the company, that's really a good story. So maybe these companies should also ask themselves, are we like really qualifying for the criteria of this prize, or should we rather go out there and try to find the first customer rather than go for a prize and put a lot of money in there? Because what I saw is that there are startups out there who are applying for these prizes, then believe because they didn't qualify that their idea is not worth to invest more. And then I put a lot of effort in there to tell them, hey, no one can judge that at that early stage. So you rather go out there, and if you don't find any customers, that's the higher proof that it doesn't work. So at least try to find some customers. And that's something which I'm struggling with a little bit, but that's something you see too. And I think for you, it was just the opportunity, and you just...
Yeah. No, I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, winning or losing a competition is not going to be the determining factor for your company at a later stage, and no one should be discouraged because they didn't win a competition, because competitions are in life, and the criteria, as you mentioned, the criteria might be different. On the other hand, I think preparing for those competitions can help a lot, because the more you pitch, the better. Right? Is it for that competition or for that? Like, you just train yourself, right? Even if you now sit at home and you say, okay, I'm doing this really complicated product that no one will understand, and there's no point of me applying, still apply, because it forces you to put your thoughts into somehow a slide deck, which is easily understandable for a lot of people that have no expertise in your area, and you will have to do that anyways. So I think actually going into these competitions, it helps you structure your thoughts a little bit, because you basically, it forces you to write a business plan and then to present it over and over again. And every time you present it, you will realize that something is a little off, or maybe you should tweak this little thing. And I think that helps.
Okay, but then it's actually more like, then you should take these competitions more like a business plan coaching, and it's like guiding you through the process, instead of saying the ultimate goal is to win that prize. And if we are not winning, then we are super depressed. Like, you should say, if we win, then it's a plus, it's an additional money we get, but the goal is actually not winning. The goal is to prepare ourselves for then actually raising money. I think that's a very, very important message.
Yeah, because your pitch deck is going to get better every single time. And I mean, I remember the first time I had to pitch Ava, I was maybe in the company for a month, and I was so nervous. I remember that, and it was really not an important event. It really wasn't, right? But it was some kind of competition. We lost that competition, by the way. But it was some kind of competition, and we had to go there and we had to present it, and there were maybe 20 people, and they were all really nice, having dinner. Like, there was nothing to be scared of, but it was still, the first time you do this, you're nervous. And then we did it over and over and over again. And at the point when we started raising our seed round, we've already done this so many times. We had this perfect routine. We knew exactly, we had every different scenario. I mean, we're 4 founders. So different people went to different pitches, and you knew, okay, if I'm sitting in the train in the morning with Philip, then this is how we're going to distribute the deck. If I'm with Peter, then this is how we're going to distribute. Like, we just had this routine. Yeah. And because you have to do it so many times, and I think that really helped.
Yeah. And why did you decide to go to the US? You just make it so obviously, of course you had to go to the US, but why did you decide, or how did you find out, and what were the main reasons to say, okay, we are actually launching the product first in the US?
We had different reasons, but the biggest reason was the market. We just knew that we have a new technology that is really superior to everything that is out there right now. It is a better product, and we knew that we have to be really, really fast to make sure that we become the standard in the market. And if you have to be fast and you're doing a consumer product, then you have to go to the US. It's just because it's so much more scalable. I mean, we're doing Europe now, and I see how we're struggling in Europe from time to time because we have to translate everything, and it's complicated, and every single market is different. In the US, you can just scale things much, much, much faster. And the US market is bigger, it's more innovation friendly. And also, I think, and I mean, we've seen that with certain examples in the Swiss startup ecosystem. If you don't go to the US, someone else will start a company there, will get a ton more funding than you will, and in a couple of years they'll come to Europe. Yeah. And that's what it was really important for us to say, okay, if we're the first ones here and we have a better technology, we need to scale it as fast as somewhat possible.
Okay, so that's not someone else is doing it. Is there any recommendation you can give to someone who is thinking about actually going to the US? What did you do in preparation? Was there something that was super important?
I think we were lucky because we were part of CTI, and we could do this 1 month at Swissnac's intro program, and then we could do another 3 months. So it was almost like a slow process. We went there first for a month. Yeah. Our flights were even covered, so they were paid for, and so the expense wasn't that big. So I went there just to see, and then we liked it, and then we went there for another 3 months, and then we took the decision to go there. So it was still, even though the decision was very clear that we have to do it, we still gave ourselves a little bit of time to go and check whether that makes sense or not. And I would really recommend everyone to do those camps because they're great. They bring you over there, they give you a place to work, and it really helps initially.
So you were at that Swissnac's office. Were you already in the new one, or were it still the old one?
Still in the old one.
Okay. So it's even more interesting to go now, right?
It is. Yeah. It's wonderful now. I mean, I would really recommend everyone to do it.
I haven't been there, but it seems that they have really, really nice offices at the pier, right?
They do. It's wonderful. And I think really the other recommendation is to go as early as possible. I think we went really early, but already there we had a certain structure in place in Switzerland, and we have built things up here, and then we raised money in Switzerland. I think depending on the industry that you're in, it might make sense to go much earlier. And it might even make sense to go and found your company in the States from the beginning on.
But then it would be super sad. So you would win all the prizes here in Switzerland.
Yeah, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. And it's going to be much harder to win the prizes in San Francisco, I can tell you.
Probably.
But from the outside, I really appreciate the whole incubator model that they have in the US. I think if you're a really young company in Switzerland, and it makes sense with your business model, I think applying to Y Combinator or 500 startups early on would make a lot of sense. I mean, they're focusing more and more also on foreign companies. They would bring you in. Yes, they take some of your equity right away, but they give you money and they put you through this really intense program. Yeah. And I mean, it was too late for us. When we looked at it, we were already too far in the process.
When can you say it's too late? Like for someone who is thinking about it?
I think once you've raised money or you're very close to it, it's too late.
Because they really want to have this initial stake in your company. They are taking between 5 and 10%, depending, I believe.
Yeah, I think so, depending
like
probably how good you negotiate.
Or something.
Yeah, exactly. And then they bring you in and they put you through that program, but really they don't want outside investors at this point. Yeah. I think they could deal maybe with some, but I mean, in general, in the US, they don't really like companies that have European investment, right? Yeah. And especially if it happens so early already at the pre-seed stage.
Do you have American investors now?
We have investors who are based in the US and in Europe, but they all have ties somehow to Switzerland or Europe. Okay. Yeah.
Because in the end, that's what I heard a lot of times, like you have a messed up cap table. Or that was like something because I just didn't realize that we were messing it up for like 5 years. And then when I started to talk to American investors, it got really, really hard. So that's something also, if you start with a clean sledge, it might be easier to get the structure right with an American market.
I don't know how you can be a Swiss company without a messed up cap table. Yeah. It's impossible. It's the way we finance here that will mess up your cap table, and it's just you're gonna have a lot of investors. And for a US VC in a seed round having more than, let's say, 2 investors is a messed up cap table. And it's really basically you need to have 2 investors max, and those investors have to be in the US. They have to be US based, and your company also has to be based in the US. So you also have to flip the company and bring it to the US, and that's what they're looking for. Yeah. And as soon as you've done one of those differently, then it's too late.
Right.
But if you can still help it and you can influence it from the very beginning, that is an option. But it also means that you are founding an American company and you have to be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
In our case, it wouldn't have worked because we have our headquarters in Switzerland. We like that we have it here, we want to keep it, and my co-founders are here.
Right.
But if you are young, hungry, and ambitious, and you want to go to San Francisco and only start your company there, then do it right from the beginning and go early.
Is there any way how you can still like turn it around, or is it like, do you have the strategy that you say the later we are and the more powerful we are, that maybe the Americans are still in? Is this a scenario that could happen, and are you actually aiming for that?
Yeah. I think that's exactly what happens. I think if you're messed up cap table, as soon as you're relevant enough, and then it doesn't matter anymore. I mean, we've seen cases, right, in like a Series B, possibly even C scenario, suddenly American investors get interested, even though you're legally based in Europe and even though your cap table looks not according to standards. But you need to make it till there, right?
Yeah.
So you need to at least raise your Series A somewhere in Europe. I think Series A is probably too early, unless
in
you're
your
like
case, just to like
successful.
for people who are not that familiar with these A and B and Cs, like I learned that when I was in the US.
Yeah.
So the A round in your case was like roughly 10 million. Yeah,
exactly.
And so you're aiming now to raise a B round, or is it? Do you already prepare? There are people out there who say after you close, you already have to start raising again. Like, how do you do that? And is it a goal to raise B soon, or is it not necessary?
We are right now deciding on that. I think we do not want to raise our Series B just because we want to raise a Series B. There's nothing to gain from that. We want to have a very clear plan why we're raising that money, what additional things could we do, and that's what we're building up right now. So right now we're building up those business scenarios where we say, okay, that's what we would need the money for. And to your question, do you raise as soon as you've stopped raising? Yes, because the best time to raise is when you don't need money.
The money, okay, yeah. And so, but then a B round would be larger, right? So you would raise maybe like a 30, 40, 50 million maybe to really like grow internationally. Like it was, in your case, it would probably be a lot of money you would spend on marketing and bringing the product to different markets. Is that something you are aiming for, or where is Ava standing in these funny letters?
In the funny letters? I mean, we're post A, we're pre-B. And I mean, a B round is definitely an option for us, a really attractive option. But again, I mean, I think the numbers you mentioned would be too high because we just don't need the money. Okay. I think that's another kind of startup thing. You should really raise what you need and plus a little bit more, but you also shouldn't just raise because you can. Yeah. And so we are right now looking at what we would do with that money. And I mean, for us as a medical technology company, the things we would do with that money is mostly clinical research. Okay. Actually, marketing is important, but we don't need that much of an upfront investment in a market to make it work. So for us, it's really much more important to invest further in medical research that we need.
Is there any advice on like choosing an idea? Because you said you had your ed tech idea, which you didn't follow up on, and then you joined Ava. Is there anything you could recommend? Like if someone says, hey, I could go for A or B or C, how would you recommend someone to take a decision? What would you go for?
I think if you look at your idea list, you have to be aware that if this thing works out, in 10 years, you're still going to be working on this. I think a lot of people have this impression, and I had it, right? You look at things and you're like, instant success, and 3 years, or you don't even believe in the idea really, so you say, 2 or 3 years, I'll do that now. But in reality, if this works out, you're going to do this for a really long time. So look at that list and say, okay, what do I still feel comfortable with in a couple of years? And I would say intuitively go for the idea that means the most to you, that for some reason you really, really think it should be there. Because, I mean, I saw that when I changed from chocolate to women's health. Great example. I mean, I love chocolate and I'm really passionate about it, but it's not something that I can be really proud of and, say, okay, I sold chocolate in India that was, I mean, of course I tried to spin it that way and I said, okay, premium chocolate wasn't there, more healthy, whatever. But in the end, it's a complete difference to work in women's health, which personally really, really means a lot to me.
You're affecting lives.
Exactly, and I affect my own life, right? So that really helps. So I would really urge people to take something that they're comfortable with in the long run, and also they have some kind of personal connection to, that makes it really valuable for them to be there.
Do you have like something like mentors or coaches or people you relate to, like that you have a close relationship?
I do, but I don't have this really formal mentor that a lot of people are talking about. So I wouldn't. I mean, people always say that it's really necessary for you to have that. I'm not sure if it is. I think so far. Yeah. But I would still be open to finding one. So if you know anyone,
Let's turn it around. I think you could be a wonderful mentor to other people. Probably time is an issue in your case, and maybe location because you're in the US. But if there are, especially women out there, young entrepreneurs who would like to reach out to you, is there any way that you say, hey, if you're doing this or that, and you think I could help you in any way? Like, what's the best way to get in touch with you and maybe to have you as a mentor?
As an entrepreneur, you're still in the middle of things. You always find the idea of being a role model that you mentioned before, or mentoring people you find a little strange. But for me, absolutely. I would happily meet for coffee whenever I can. I'm usually in the US, but if anyone comes by there or in Zurich, and everyone should just reach out to me. It's lea.vonbidder@avawomen.com. They should just write me an email.
Okay, very cool. So thank you so much for taking the time, and all the best with Ava.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lea.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks.